now. I'm going to hit the record, so you should get a notification saying that we're recording. So this is an office hour session, which is something I've done before with just kind of open office hours for people to come by with concerns. We have definitely received a lot of feedback from constituents regarding the proposed parks ordinance, and because there would have been no way for me to connect with everyone individually one at a time, we decided we'd dedicate a couple of office hours sessions so that we can try to answer the questions to the extent possible all at once, and then also just share some more information I think that may be helpful. So a little bit about our plan tonight. So this is the welcome. We're really glad you're here. We'll go through and talk a bit about the process of, the parks ordinance review on the just logistical end, how this is proceeding, where we are in the process. I'll address some of the common concerns that I've heard from many people, and then we'll have an open dialogue. So anything that you need further clarification on, concerns that I didn't address, thoughts, feedback, happy to take it. And then we'll have next steps, plans for follow-up, and another opportunity for you to share feedback as well. So getting started, I am Commissioner Nicole Frethem, representing District 1. There's a note on there about the cities in District 1 that I represent. If you don't live in one of these cities or in my district, that's still totally okay that you're here. Welcome, just wanting to make sure folks know the places that I represent. And then Sheena Denny is also on the call. She's my aide. You may have received follow-up from her. She's been very amazing in trying to keep track of everyone who is interested in this topic and giving folks information about answering specific questions as well as directing folks here. So with that, we'll talk about the process for the Parks Ordinance project. So in general, it's not just the Parks Ordinance that gets reviewed periodically. All the ordinances get reviewed on some sort of a cycle to make sure that, there's not some weird outdated policy in there that's not helpful for us and gives us a chance to add new policies that might be missing or things people thought were there. The way this has worked, it got delayed a bit because of COVID, but it started in December of 2020, and that was the internal process. So it involved multiple county departments, including our elected departments of the Attorney's Office and the Sheriff's Office, as well as within the county structure under the board and the county manager, our Parks Department, risk assessment and compliance, our policy and planning team as well. So many departments looking at that ordinance to determine, if there are just trends in parks ordinances, what could be done to simplify it as sort of a general government directive. That we want to make sure people can understand policies. It makes it easier to follow them. After that process, there was a really intentional outreach to do a race equity review. We do this with all of our policies, knowing that there continue to be stark racial disparities. So regardless of the policy, we ask if there are any ways in which the policy as written contributes to any of those disparities. And from there, the parks team, based on all that feedback they received, drafted a proposed ordinance that then went out to the community for community feedback. So July to August, there was some intentional feedback, more short terms. There was a survey where there was about 1,500 respondents, which I think is the most popular survey Ramsey County's put out maybe ever. There were a couple of virtual meetings. They weren't as closely attended. And then, of course, all of us commissioners have been getting feedback from folks as well. So that's provided additional opportunities for public feedback in this process. November 2nd is the first time this will officially come to the board for feedback and direction. So we will have a board workshop, and this is an open meeting, so it'll be, advertised and noticed, much the way all of our meetings are. So you can participate because of where we're at in COVID. We are meeting virtually now, so that would be a Zoom live stream, or you can watch after the fact as well. And at this point, there's no policy decisions made at the workshop. This is when park staff will share what they've done and ask the board for feedback on, and they may give their own recommendations as well. So this is really still pretty early in our parks ordinance project, the work that's been seen so far in terms of the additional steps that need to be taken. And this will be the first time it comes before the board. So we did try to schedule these office hours so that they were between when our Parks Department released a summary of the survey feedback, which also includes some thoughts on the options that were put out to the community, and when the workshop is. So part of what I'm hoping to get from this is what questions do we need additional follow-up on? What questions are you hoping I can ask in the workshop that I can raise there as well, and then just be able to share that feedback that I've been hearing from the community in the workshop as part of my policy guidance. After the board workshop, that's when our parks team will take the feedback received from the commissioners, from the community engagement, virtual meetings and survey, and they will revise and publish a revised draft ordinance. So I expect it will look different from what you've seen based on the feedback they've received. And then once the revised draft ordinance is published, there'll be a 5-week public comment period. So there'll be opportunities to provide written comment during that 5-week period, and then there will be a public hearing for the draft ordinance, and that will be an opportunity once again for people to share additional feedback. We're looking at the earliest date for that is the end of December. I don't expect us to get it in at the end of December based on the amount of feedback that's been received. My guess is that there'll be additional, the revising process will take a little bit longer, and you're more likely to see that public hearing early in 2022, probably sometime in January. And then we can't vote on it as a board of commissioners until after that public hearing. So that's the timeline. The soonest there will be an actual vote on any action would be early 2022. So for those of you who are concerned that you've missed out on feedback, you haven't. There's still plenty of opportunities to give feedback. So I'm including on the key takeaways. First and foremost, there is no vote scheduled, so you don't need to urge me to vote no yet because I've got nothing to vote on. And honestly, we haven't even had an opportunity to provide robust feedback at this point. I did ask our parks director when I started getting community comment in for a 30-minute meeting where we talked a bit about this process, and I asked him some questions based on the website so that we could provide responses to folks. But as a board, we haven't met, so I don't really know where my colleagues are sitting on this issue because we haven't had an opportunity to discuss that. That sort of policy discussion has to happen in an open meeting, so that's what the workshop will be on November 2nd. And that the ordinance will be reviewed and revised before there's a vote scheduled. So I do not expect to vote on the ordinance that you have seen thus far. I expect there to be changes on it before it ever comes to me for a vote. And of course, there will be additional opportunities for the public to weigh in before any enactment occurs, including official public comment period and official public hearing. So from that, I want to address some of the common concerns. First, there were some process concerns that I've heard from people that there wasn't enough outreach to gather community input. Obviously, with any action that we take, and we take many actions on any given week, it's not always easy to tell what folks are going to have concerns about. And so there's always a push and pull on, what do we legally have to do? What more can we do? How are we going to balance the cost involved in getting that additional feedback and engagement? And how different will the results be if we do that additional work? So in terms of that, there was a social media campaign advertised. There were Ramsey County email updates, which of course you have to opt into. And so one of those updates is my newsletter, and we did send out information in my newsletter about the parks ordinance. The parks team also put up signs in all the parks. It was another way. There was not direct mail outreach to residents around park properties. My understanding is that the Parks Department does not want to do that in this instance because the parks are seen as more of a public, they're everybody's parks, and concern about an appearance of some sort of bias favoring people on adjacent properties. While I can sort of understand their argument, I will continue to push for more direct mail outreach while understanding that I am only one commissioner on a board of commissioners, and unless I have other folks with me on that, I don't know if I can change that dynamic. Obviously, there's been some newspaper coverage on this, so that was another way where word gets out. There's been a ton of word of mouth, so thanks for folks who've been talking to your neighbors. That is one of the ways we get information. And then here right now, these are continued opportunities for community feedback and input. And I know it's not ideal. I know folks would like to be reached more directly when they can. But I do want to share in the summary document, and we can post links to some of these and put it in our follow-up as well. If you look at the survey results, 45% of the survey responses came from District 1 area codes. So there are 4 area codes that represent District 1, 55127, 55126, 55112, and 55110. And obviously some of the folks in some of those districts, in those zip codes live in other districts as well, but you can see that there's a lot of feedback from folks within my district. So while recognizing a lot of my constituents were concerned that they didn't know about it and concerned that there wasn't enough feedback from people in the suburbs and people around the parks, I think the survey responses really showed that there was a lot of feedback from folks in our area. And so those voices were heard. And what we're hearing in terms of additional feedback from the community is really aligned with the results that we got in the survey. So getting into that substantive feedback, 24-hour parks is the biggest concern that we heard about. To talk a little bit like on the esoteric policy level of why someone would want a 24-hour park policy. This is a trend in some parks, but it's more common in Europe and big cities in the US. There are some philosophical arguments for it that it's public land and it should be open to everyone at any time. In some places, Paris is a big one. Climate change is a factor when there's hotter weather during the day to provide opportunity for outdoor time and exercise in a public park when it is not as hot, which is usually when the sun is down, is helpful. And then there are some safety arguments for opening parks for 24 hours. It was something seen in, say, Central Park, that once Central Park in New York City was open for more people to use as legitimately all hours of the night, they saw a decrease in criminal activity in that area. There are other pieces of it as well. In one of the things that works really well in European countries, especially in cities like Paris or big cities here in the US, is if you've got a more late dining culture and you're not going out till dinner till 9 and then you want to go for a stroll in the park afterwards, having the parks open makes sense. Obviously that and other reasons, that's not really our culture here in the northern Ramsey County suburbs. There aren't a lot of restaurants right next to our parks, exception of Lindy's near Lake Johanna, but folks don't stay out late to eat here and then go stroll in the park. That's not really the way our culture does things. So responding to that need or desire isn't really something that this policy would do. More importantly, even the research that I done that was advocating for parks departments to consider a 24-hour park policy said that adequate lighting infrastructure was a prerequisite to adopting such a policy. And we don't have that lighting structure in Ramsey County parks. So at this time, there's no way I could comfortably approve it when even people who advocate for this policy think that lighting needs to be in place. As I already noted, county parks really serve a different function and culture than our city parks. And so those functions aren't really met by adopting this policy here. And then finally, the climate impacts have been less severe in Minnesota in terms of heat. And then even when we've had heat waves, if you think about our county parks, they actually have a lot of cooling infrastructure in them naturally because of the number of lakes that we have. There aren't a lot of Paris parks where you can go dip in the lake in the middle of the city, but we have multiple McCarrans and Johanna and Owasso. And so we have a lot of lakes where there is natural cooling structure that even when it's hot out, you can get out there and be outside and cool down and exercise. So that even that climate reason isn't as powerful here. So to the big concern is whether I support 24-hour parks policy, no. And if the final park ordinance that came before me had a 24-hour policy, I will vote against it. I don't think there is a good policy reason to do that right now in our community. I do support changing hours for more clarity. I think 5 a.m. to 10 p.m. makes a lot of sense, but I've asked the Parks Department for additional information about what hours all of our cities employ, both in terms of park hours, but also noise ordinance hours, because I know some folks had expressed concern that languages around noise in some parts of the ordinance had been removed, but that's mostly to remove duplication because all of our parks are covered under the city noise ordinances. So I think if we were to have our parks open till 11 p.m., but the vast majority of our cities had noise ordinance starting at 10 p.m., I think we've got a mismatch there in policy. So right now, 5 a.m. to 10 p.m. is where I'm at. 5 a.m. because I know there are people that like to get up and early and jog. I'm not one of them, but I don't want to stop them. And I think it's less likely in terms of, folks who are concerned about darkness being a cover for illicit activities. I guess I don't know these folks, but folks who are using the parks for illicit activities, I feel like 5 a.m. is less likely of a time to do that. So the other concerns that I've heard, a lot of them are around the changes to language about unlawful and penalties. One of the primary drivers of these changes is reducing redundancy. We don't need to have a park ordinance policy making it a misdemeanor to destroy parks property because it is already illegal to destroy property, anyone's private property, including the Ramsey County Parks property. So we have these sort of redundant standards in there, and then things can get confusing when you're trying to prosecute if there's multiple laws. The other piece of it is right size accountability. Right now, there is one pathway to cite someone for behaving incorrectly in a park. And that one pathway is a misdemeanor and up to $1,000 fine. So it doesn't matter if you are destroying parks property or if you are walking on a cross-country trail instead of a walking trail. The only way to hold you accountable is through a misdemeanor citation. So the additional administrative pathways or exploring the petty misdemeanor route, so there are kind of two options folks are exploring in changing the language, provide a lot more options between the current options, which is either diversion, education, one of our officers or deputies sees someone violating a park ordinance and they say, hey, cut that out. And they hope they do, or it's a misdemeanor. So there's really nothing in between. So being able to create that administrative pathway provides additional opportunities for accountability for actions that might be in between there. And this is, and I think one of the papers pointed this out, there are very few citations given in the first place. So it's not a lot of, we're not seeing a lot of crime in our parks to that extent that are getting a park ordinance violation. And the primary thing that we do see is parking violations. And I do want to note that one of the things I want to lift up during our workshop is if that's what we're seeing, are we seeing those parking violations in certain parks? And have we explored whether or not the parking infrastructure in those parks is adequate? I know in particular, the parking around Rice Creek North and the dog park there is small. And during those peak times, there are a lot of folks who end up parking illegally. I'm not turning anyone in, but because that's when people are trying to go when we have limited time to get out there and exercise. So I think in addition to looking at what is the accountability pathway, do those citations indicate that we need to make changes in our parks to better meet the needs of the community? I will add that if you have concern about language, this change in language from unlawful on a specific rule that you don't think that you think there might be a gap in our ability to prosecute criminally, either under a state or city statute, please let me know. I'm willing to follow up and dig into that, but I do also know that this has been reviewed by, as I said, our partners, both internally and externally, including lots of attorneys and our county attorney's office and our county sheriff's office. The other concern that we've heard from many people is that the parks ordinance review and proposal is, so some sort of cover or motivated by a desire for Ramsey County to set up homeless encampments in Ramsey County parks. And no, that's not true. That's not true a little bit. We want to get people into homes, not parks. And camping, residing in Ramsey County parks is currently prohibited and will remain so. Even under the way the language is currently drafted in the draft language, if there were no parks hours, it would still be illegal. So that's one where I just want to like shut that down. That is not a motivating factor. That's not a reason why we pursued that. It's not a policy that I've ever heard anyone on the board advocate, or at least a policy purpose for this. So those are the big concerns that I've heard a lot of. We now have an opportunity for you to ask your questions, and I'm doing a time check. What are we at here? Perfect. 6:51. So we've got a good 30 minutes for folks to ask additional questions, ask additional clarification. There are a couple of ways to do that. You can go to your reactions, I believe it is, and raise your hand. There should be a raise your hand option, or you can put your question in the chat. Or if you've got your camera on, you can wave at me to let me know you have a question. And we can hang out here as long as you like well, not as long as you like, for the next 3 minutes to hear your questions. And then there'll be another option at the end where we'll give you a link where if you want to submit your questions more privately, you can do that as well. All right, Scott, go ahead.
Just a question. I'm sorry if I didn't catch it on your flow chart that you started off with. Right now, we're at this place where they're coming out with a draft of what they expect to be voted on. Is that correct? I mean, I think November 2nd was that date.
So November 2nd is when we have our workshop. I am not entirely sure whether they will have a new draft for us at that time, or instead what they will do is they will share the previous draft and all the feedback. I know Sheena posted the link in the chat, and there's a summary of the survey responses and the engagement responses. There's also, you can view all of the responses, but that's a 500-page document. The survey summary does a really good job of summarizing what they heard. And it includes some suggestions of what the commissioner should consider in terms of policy guidance. So either they will be presenting us the first ordinance and the summary document, and we'll give feedback from there, and then they'll do a revised draft ordinance, or they'll revise it beforehand, and then we'll comment on that, and there might be another revision. But I think it's the first option, where we won't actually see new language until after the workshop, based on our feedback and policy guidance in response to what we hear at the workshop. But there will be another draft ordinance.
Yeah, I guess my concern was, according to your flow chart, you go into this 5-week public comment period after the revised draft is out. And then you have public hearings for the draft ordinance. But, I guess I don't see another box as to, are you going to do another draft or change the language of that document before you vote?
Yeah.
Comment.
No, that's a good question, Scott. So we can, whether we do or not is uncertain. At this point, it'll depend on what comes out of the revised draft ordinance, right? And I would expect to see some robust changes based on both the community engagement feedback and commissioner feedback. If what we hear in the public hearing and in the public comment period identifies additional concerns or changes, we have additional opportunity as commissioners to let at the public hearing or when the request for board action is done, to tell our staff this is not acceptable and it needs additional work. So for example, it wasn't an ordinance, but I'm trying to think of another ordinance where this might have happened, but we've had a few policies, like for example, our naming policy, when that first came to us, we had a discussion, and I don't know that there had been a workshop first, but there was a pretty robust discussion and it ended up getting tabled. and staff came back later with a revised version. So it's not a done deal. My hope would be, and my expectation would be, based on the feedback we've received and the workshop, that they will be able to revise the ordinance in such a way that many of the community concerns would be alleviated and we wouldn't need to do another revision, but that's not precluded by my flow chart.
I think you alleviated a lot of the concerns I think many of us have about what's in that initial proposal. But, you know, the proof is in the pudding when you see the revised draft and what's actually, you know, stays in there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I totally get it. And that's what we're hoping to look at. And I think that's, for me, being able to take back, like, these are the concerns, and being able to say, look, if you come back to me with a revised draft ordinance that has like no park hours, it's just all the time, I'm going to vote against it. And I know our staff don't like that. They want to find a solution that works for the board. So I'm hoping we get to a place where it's workable and something that alleviates the concerns that we've heard.
And just one thing with regard to the safety in terms of park hours after dark. As you know, we live by 20 Schmidt Park, and you know, you've got Lake Johanna Boulevard that runs right through the beach area versus the, you know, the park area, and it is dark. Even driving through there, you know, in the dark, if we have more activity across there, I'd have a concern about the safety of park pedestrians, you know, going from one side of the Lake Johanna Boulevard to the other.
Absolutely. And I can tell you, we're going to talk a lot about lighting infrastructure, and that's something I've already lifted up. And I've actually already talked before the park ordinance came up about what is our safety infrastructure plan, not just in terms of lighting, but also in terms of things like security cameras. And are we looking at, you know, making sure the way we have our parking set up is safe for people? I know we've been experiencing increased break-ins since COVID. You know, I'm hoping it's just, you know, folks are frustrated and there's a lack of outlets, especially for our young people who are more likely to do things like break into cars. But wanting to ensure that we have safe parks is of critical importance. And I think one thing our parks director has mentioned is that as we move through the ordinance process, once that comes up, more close examination of our safety infrastructure to build into our next capital improvement plan will be on the agenda. So I'm hoping to continue to push for that. And then other opportunities in terms of Lake Johanna, specifically with our corridor study. There was, oh, sorry, Scott, did you have another question?
Just one other thing, maybe you can clarify. You know, our understanding, I guess, is there have been very few citations written in the parks, especially if you look at number of visitors or, you know, divided by the number of parks and that kind of thing. So why is there, can you explain further about this, you know, treating these things as, you know, to a lesser degree in terms of the fine or severity or whatever the case might be there?
Yeah, well, I think there's a couple of reasons to do it. One is when we're talking about significant criminal activity, there are other pathways to pursue that other than through the parks ordinance. The other piece of that is there might be times when we feel like accountability is warranted, like we can't just sort of let folks off on this. But in that case, the only option is that misdemeanor pathway, which may not be appropriate. And so there may be some, based on the feedback we received, and again, this started with our internal stakeholders like our sheriff's department and our attorney's office, that you're either over punishing someone for an action or you're letting someone off for an action that you think there should be accountability for.
Okay. So it can work both ways. Yeah.
Right. So this really gives us more opportunities for accountability and to right size that accountability for the act. I'm also just personally, in terms of responding to harmful acts, a big fan of restorative options, and that is one of the things they're exploring. So, you know, you're littering in the parks, and you have an option then of, rather than facing a misdemeanor, of committing certain hours into cleaning up the parks, which not only directly repairs that harm, but it also is a way of helping people invest in their community more, and hopefully in the future not taking that action again. Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate that response.
No problem. And I want to respond. Matthew's got a question in chat, and then I'll go to Joe. Matthew's question believes that we don't intend to turn parks into homeless encampments, and given lack of enforcement of many laws, many of us believe there's a good chance that a homeless encampment will be an unintentional consequence. So I'll say right now that it's illegal now, it's illegal then. Right now, parks are only patrolled till 10 p.m. And I don't know that there are any expected changes to that with the ordinance. It's not my understanding there are any expected changes. So I don't know that that's something that's going to motivate a change in behavior. I guess that's the piece. Certainly, there's always the potential for unintentional consequences with any policy action. So I don't want to delegitimize that. But we don't know what those might be. And it's hard to foresee a reason why that would change when this is something we are continued to committing, we're continuing that this is not something that can happen in our parks and there needs to be enforcement on it. Also clarifying and simplifying the policies and ordinance rules means that it's easier for folks to follow it. And there's not as much of a need to enforce something that's not clearly illegal. So I guess I don't see how the changes in the parks ordinance could lead to more of a chance that someone would set up an illegal homeless encampment, I guess is what I'm saying. And our hope is that we continue to have options and enforcement in our parks, that the way that that's being done isn't going to change, and that we are continued and committed to reducing encampments and housing everyone that doesn't have housing. So I can't guarantee you it won't be. I'm not seeing a reason why it would be, and I have no sense of lack of commitment on the part of my colleagues in terms of housing. So, and I can certainly, if our sheriff's office is there, I can ask them about it at the workshop. But I do expect that part of the rules around our park will continue to be enforced, because it's not something we're proposing changing. And then I'll go to Joe, and feel free, Matthew, if you need additional clarification, to put that in the chat.
Thanks, Nicole. Thanks for hosting this session to give people the opportunity to learn more and convey comments. Thanks also for your comment about the explanation of how or why the county chose not to notify people most adjacent to parks. I guess I can see that view. However, I will also offer another view. I happen to not be a person who lives right adjacent to a park. However, if I did, I think I would be pretty vocal about this issue right now. But it actually, in my mind, makes the county look kind of heavy-handed by not doing that, by notifying people adjacent to the park. I mean, there's a long-standing precedent, and it's a little different with where cities will always notify local residents when there's a zoning variance that will be on the agenda. And they give the people most nearby the greatest say in what's going on. It's best, I mean, yes, you're going to get negative comments from people close by a park. You probably get the most negative comments from people by the park. But what you want to do, I would argue, is you want to get those negative comments out. You want to flush them out. You want to get as many of those out as early as you can. And by trying to avoid it, which is I think what the county is trying to do, it actually makes them look weak. It makes the county look underhanded. And I would argue you should follow the longstanding precedent that cities have been doing for decades to notify people adjacent to a park. You could still do a massive campaign that you did on Facebook, whatever. But I think that people that live next to a park have some special, heads up knowledge about what's going on, and to ignore them, I think it's just a bad thing to do. You're going to get a better solution by getting those comments out early.
Joe, I agree with you. And I also think it's an opportunity to build partnership with folks. And the county does it in other ways. I got a postcard yesterday about the Victoria Street corridor study because I live right off of Victoria. So it's not a it's not a county-wide policy or ordinance. So while I can understand to an extent their reasoning behind it, I just don't think it was fully thought out. And I think it, like you said, the optics on it are terrible. So I do intend to raise this at the workshop and to reiterate my urging that they reconsider that approach and that they do a mailing much in the same way that they do around our road and corridor projects for people nearby the property. I think they should do that. And so I will continue to advocate for that. Because I think that's important, and I think folks should know what's going on around their corner. We have specialized meetings when there are other things happening and notifications. So it just, yeah, it doesn't fully sit right. I think they're trying. I see what they're trying to do. I just don't think it's done in the right way, and I think it's upsetting more people than it's offsetting their concerns about potentially making it look like that folks adjacent to the parks are favored in this process. I think it's better to engage people early and engage people in general, which is why I'm here with you all tonight. But no, I agree. I will, and I thank you for the zoning variances example. I will share that as well, in addition to the corridor studies, to make my pitch for mailing to go out as part of the public comment period engagement. I'm doing my best teacher silence thing, but I'm not very good at it. I'm going to go to the final slide, but you can still jump in if you think of something. For the follow-up and next steps, we're going to put a link to a Google form in the chat. It gives you another opportunity and space to ask questions or share concerns, things that you think really need to be brought up during the workshop. You can also give us your contact information so that we can follow up with you more directly. There's an option if you want us to add you to the District 1 newsletter so you can get updates about things going on. We try to get those out at least monthly, sometimes more frequently, sometimes less, depending on what else is going on. But we always try to include the most relevant things to our district, since the county's doing a lot of things. And then just some feedback on this section and this session, and whether it was helpful and whether you'd like more of these on different policies. For folks who give us their contact information, or if we've got, or who sign up for the newsletter, or if we've already got your email address, we'll send out the link for the county board workshop on November 2nd. You can live stream it via the Zoom, or you could watch the recording after the session. And then once we see the revised draft ordinance, we'll be able to share info that way with you as well. And then once we know of the public hearing date, we'll be able to provide some follow-up that way. So having everyone's contact information in one place, Sheena's done a fantastic job organizing all of this, but because we got a lot of folks who came in via phone calls, who didn't necessarily leave an email address, or folks who maybe just saw the Facebook advertisement or Facebook events and joined that way, or word of mouth, we might not have your contact info. So this just makes sure that we're able to follow up with you afterwards. I'm probably not going to ask Sheena to individually call everyone who called us at each of these stages. So I really encourage you, if you have an email address, to share it. But these will also be posted, on the Ramsey County website. We'll share them via our social media. They'll also go on Ramsey County social media. So there are many ways to sign up to get this info, but if you want it more directly, if we have your email address, we can provide it. Otherwise, I allotted another 20 minutes. I'll give you my thank you slide, and otherwise we can hang out for as long as you like.
Hi, this is Dave.
Hi, Dave.
I just want to thank you for doing this. It means a lot to us. I know you didn't have to do it, but I'm going to start my video if I can, so you can see who I am. It means a lot because I was very concerned that if the park's just open 24 hours a day, we will have crime and noise and people moving in. I certainly don't want that, and it's very clear you don't want that either. So if hours are expanded, we need to have police or someone patrolling the parks. We need lighting for people. We need to make it clear that this is not a homeless shelter. This is just a park. And I've been to Paris and I've seen what their parks are like. They are entirely different than what we have here. So again, thank you for doing this. I would love to be kept abreast of what's happening. I will attend as many sessions as I can because this is a very important issue. So.
Well, thank you, Dave, for being engaged and for caring and for coming tonight. I know there's so many other ways you could have spent your Tuesday night, so thanks for joining us. Hopefully by next spring, we'll get to do these things in person, but I know this is nice as well because you can stay cozy in your house. But I really do enjoy the opportunity to share information with folks and to hear from people and to, talk about our shared values. Yeah, we all want safe parks. We want to keep our parks beautiful and to be able to continue to enjoy them with our families. And that's not something I'm willing to sacrifice for anything. And I want to make sure we have a policy to do that. So thank you.
Awesome.
You have something to say?
As much as I'd like to hang out, I'm going to say goodnight to all.
You go right ahead. No one has to stay and just sit with us if you don't want to, but I'll hang out as long as people are here if anyone's got a question.
Okay. Good night.
So I also attended on Saturday, and the people on Saturday were a little bit more cantankerous about issues, and the people tonight are much more mellow. Some of the same issues came up, and it's really interesting just to see the different tone from Saturday to today from the people attending. And I think the process is very clear, very fair, very transparent. And I signed up for your newsletter, and so did my husband. So we can be fully informed of what's going on. We live across Lake Johanna from Tony Schmidt Park. So if there was a lot of noise there, it would carry over the water.
Yeah.
Or if there were fires, we would see them. And so we value that little spot because we see people there from new Americans who don't even speak English, have found the park for their kids and the beach, and it's wonderful because for some of them, wherever they came from, they may have not had that experience. And so I think it's a wonderful resource for our whole community.
Right.
And I'll say good night.
Thank you. Have a good one. Thanks for joining us again.
Bye-bye.
Hey, everyone.
Hi, Dave. Hey, Daryl.
Hello there. Can you hear me?
I can. How are you?
I am fine. I'm fine. Say, I just have one piece of information I wanted to pass on because it is something that we have discussed before. And that was the change in hours at Lake McCarran's Park.
Mhm.
Remember, we had talked about that before, and nobody seemed to know why those hours were changed. I did have the opportunity to find out, and I think definitively why the hours were changed. And it does continue to make me concerned about lengthening the hours later into the evening on these parks. And my understanding, as I say, I do believe this, and it seems to be pretty definitive because I got it from a reliable source, that the hours at Lake McCarran's Park were changed because they had so much trouble after dark. And that's why those hours were moved from a half an hour after sunset back to 9:30 year round. And so I just wanted to let you know that, and just as a reminder of why we're so concerned about lengthening the hours more into the evening. Certainly 24 hours would be the biggest problem, but even going to 10 or 11 o'clock is worrisome for those of us who live near the park. So just wanted to pass that information on to you.
Thanks, Daryl. That's interesting. Yeah, we did ask our park staff and none of them knew. Whatever the end result is of the ordinance review, McCarran's will be looped into that ongoing, so we don't have differences. I mean, it's tricky because, you know, if you're having trouble after dark, but then setting the hours at 9:30, well, it's been dark for a half hour now, so I couldn't go to any other park but McCarran's right now, legally. So having some clarity around that, I think, would be important. And yeah, that noise piece for me, that's why I really want to see that information about our municipal noise ordinances. Obviously, there's all or part of 17 different cities and townships in Ramsey County. We are not going to be able to align with everyone's noise ordinance, but I think we could see that critical mass, and I think that would provide some good information in terms of, like, if we're going to set clear hours, what should it be? Because it shouldn't be after a point in which cities would say it's time to be done being noisy. So that for me, I think is good information to have around the noise ordinances, so we can be more consistent, not just internally with our park hours, but across the county.
Okay, and thank you once again for doing these Zoom meetings. It's really been helpful, and it's nice of you to take the time to do it.
Absolutely. Thank you. Well, I mean, I wish I could sit down with everyone. I know I did get to sit down with Daryl, that I started getting more and more calls and requests. I was like, I can't sit down with everyone. That's all I'll be doing for the next 3 weeks. So I appreciate folks coming to a group meeting and getting a chance to get information all at once. And I do like hanging out with people. I wish it could have been like a big circle process like we did with Race Creek Commons, but you know, another time. I think that's more fun because you get to know people a little bit better too. Hi, Larry, how are you? I see your name on there. You're hiding out. I haven't heard from you in a while. I hope you're well.
Hi, Nicole. Yeah, we're kind of just watching and seeing what people have to say.
Yeah.
We have the same concerns people do. We've had a lot of people that shouldn't be out in the park accessing the neighborhood and extending the hours, extending the legitimate time to be out there is of a concern. We just found some gang graffiti out in the park.
Oh.
So we know that's starting to happen. We reported to the sheriff's office. They've been around here. And the noise is going to be the biggest thing. Plus the fact that it's not clear to me why having the parks open longer will help safety, because certainly if you're running along here early in the morning or late at night, you have a very good chance of injuring yourself or having disturbing animals or having deer or coyotes run after you. So I'm not sure why it's so important not to have it based on what the sun is doing, because it aligns more with safety in the park as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, and so there's some, varying philosophies on that. And I think the bigger one, like I mentioned earlier, what you saw in Central Park, if you have the park open for legitimate purpose, you're less likely to see illegitimate purposes happening. So say right now, the park is closed. So even though I could probably like strap on a headlamp and a reflective vest and take my dog for a walk, because as you can see, he's quite large. So safety wise, I'm not concerned about me, just someone trying to come after me with my dog. But I can't do that right now because the park is closed. But if I'm a dumb teenager with my friends going, and I know that no one's out there, I could go out and do whatever I want out there, right? But if you know that the park is still open and there are going to be, old people walking around with their dogs or people on their bikes, you're less likely to use it for that illegitimate purpose, if that makes sense. Now, it's something. So if you look at the summary document of the park ordinance engagement results, that was one of the things. So the sheriff's office currently patrols parks from noon to 10, and they noted that, I'm reading from it, that crime can more easily occur in the cover of darkness, but more people recreating in a park may deter some criminal activity. So it's as much as a wash to some extent. And the fact that we'd have more, potentially more, patrol presence around there could also, and that's, one of the things we'll be asking how much that might change if we've got more hours out there. But it's hard to say. And then the other piece of that is in terms of young people, any citywide curfews are still going to apply to them as well. So it might be a circumstance where even if parks are open, folks under 18 it would still be not permitted for them to be in the parks because they're under, again, that comes to that, there's multiple jurisdictions of laws. But I think you absolutely did the right thing when you saw criminal activity in the park, calling the sheriff's ordinance. That's the case now and would be the case after, because even if the park is open till 10, you're still not permitted to commit crime in the park until 10. So all of those pieces are still illegal, and we'd ask you to continue to be diligent in responding to those concerns.
Yeah, one of the things that I'm concerned with, though, is even for legitimate uses, with all due respect, trails aren't in condition, at least around here, for people to be walking around when it's dark, even if they do have a headlamp on. And in full disclosure, and I hope you won't report me to the sheriff's office, I have been out on the trails at night walking around with the dog once in a while. And I stopped doing that because I felt that it was very possible that I would step on part of the uneven trail. I would go down and there I would be out there with somebody trying to find me. So our parks, at least in this area, aren't really configured for nighttime use. If the issue is using the areas where there's playgrounds and stuff like that, that's a different story. But then that also starts to impact people that live around there. That's why the point that was made before about not notifying people, the noise level could be in those areas quite significant to the people that live in the area. I think that needs to be taken into account.
I think so too. And like I said, I'm going to continue pushing for some notification at the second public comment period for people with property adjacent to the parks. I think it's more of a fairness to them and to be a good neighbor more than anything else.
Yeah.
And I agree with the lighting infrastructure piece. And certainly, as with all things, folks need to be thoughtful about when and how they use the parks, and caution and whether they're able to do that in any way. There was a point last winter where I really wanted to take my dog just to the dog park because I had a puppy as well, and she was wild, and I was like, I'd love to get her out to run, but by the time dinner was done, it was already dark, and once I'd gotten to the park, I'd be out my limit. But I knew I could make it those less than 50 feet and the lighting's pretty decent. And again, she's also a big dog. So I wasn't concerned about my safety or getting there, but I knew I couldn't take her there because it was illegal. But once she was in the fence, it would have been great to give her a chance to run around because I don't have a fenced in yard. So I don't know how many people would take advantage of additional park hours. I've certainly heard from others that they would. Winter activities, cross-country skiing, snowshoeing, being able to do that, having more hours to do that. I think people would appreciate it, but you're right. There are dangers in it, and that's one of the reasons why I want to talk about the, what is our protocol or next steps in terms of coming up with a safety infrastructure plan for our parks, which is something we've been asking for anyway.
Yep. Okay, thanks. And I do appreciate you having the meeting too. It just, I think, just as a comment, it was a little hard to find the fact that you were having this meeting.
Sorry.
So, well, I'm not being critical, but getting the word out a little bit more for people to be able to access it, I think is important. We're trying to tell our neighbors around here the fact of what you're doing and what the issues are, and they all seem to be kind of surprised. So that's why it's a little disappointing that they didn't send out the cards to people to notify them of this important change.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I'm still going to be pushing for it for the next step. And these are both being recorded. And so the link to the first one was posted today on my commissioner Facebook page, but we'll also send it out in the next newsletter. And we'll send this link and post this link as well, so you can share or send the video to other folks. And then for our next follow-up newsletter, we'll include the links to that. And we won't have the link yet for the live stream, but the other park ordinance materials. And feel free to share those newsletters or to sign up. There's a link right on ramseycounty.us/district1.
Okay, thanks, Nicole.
Thanks, Larry. Have a good one. Good to hear from you.
Yeah, you too. Good to see you again.
And Annie Lee, I think you just joined and came in. We are just wrapping up, but we will be posting, as I said to Larry, we'll be posting a video link for anything you missed. And the link to the other session is also posted. I think we're coming to a close here. We've got about 3 more minutes left. So if there's anyone with a last final question, otherwise we can close up the Zoom. All right, well, I'm going to call it a night. Get back to binge watching Ted Lasso. I hope you all have a wonderful night, and we'll get a chance to see each other soon. Thank you for coming.